All right. Welcome, everyone. You are at the 2025 Bay Mini Grant webinar and Q&A. Glad you're here. My name is Jessica. I am the Community Projects Manager at the Estuary Program. You are welcome to throw questions into the chat at any point. I can't see the chat very well while I'm talking, but if you just want to make a note of your questions later, please do hold your questions until the end. I think we'll probably answer most of them, but definitely have at least 20 minutes for questions at the end. And without further ado, let's do this. So this is our agenda today. We'll run through an overview of the mini grant program. We'll dive into the grant that's open right now, including eligibility, how to apply, some new evaluation criteria. We'll aim to get through those items in the first 30, 40 minutes, something like that, and then we'll have about 20 minutes at the end for questions. Everything we're going to talk about today can be found on our website. This is it here. You're welcome to open it up now and follow along if you find that helpful. This is the basic Bay Mini Grant information. The awards are up to $5,000. It's a reimbursement type of award, so the awardee, you, the applicant, will incur the expenses, buy all the supplies, all that good stuff, and request reimbursement. The project length is up to 12 months, so between January 1st and December 31st, 2025. Sometimes they get started a little bit earlier than that. And the purpose is really environmental education and environmental restoration. Engaging the public, informing the public on the benefit of water quality, for the benefit of water quality, for habitat, for wildlife conservation, and all that good stuff in the Tampa Bay watershed. It's managed by yours truly, as the Estuary Program, and we fund this entire program through sales of this specialty license plate with the tarpon tag on it. So go ahead and get you one if you haven't already. So who is eligible to apply for a mini grant? Any registered nonprofit organization, grade schools, community colleges, universities, private businesses are eligible. Because this grant is intended to be used by the community, government entities aren't really the target applicant, but local, county, and state governments can apply, especially if there's a strong community engagement piece of that project. Individuals cannot apply. But if you're just an independent individual and you have a great idea, that's awesome. You just need to find a nonprofit or a business to pair up with so they can sort of act as your fiscal sponsor. If you're an informal organization, like you don't have a tax ID number, you're just sort of a grassroots group, you can pair up with a nonprofit, a school, a company, anyone that will agree to act as the fiscal agent for you for this award. Past award recipients have included nonprofits, educators, filmmakers, neighborhood associations, civic associations, student groups, artists, museum curators, researchers, all kinds of people use the Bay Mini Grant. So if you're not sure if you're eligible, just ask. There will be some tips included in the presentation. I may or may not read them, so just check them out as we go. This one is basically saying, check on the state's website. It's called SunBiz if you just search for that. And you can make sure that you get your tax ID number and it's in good standing before you apply. So projects must occur within the Tampa Bay watershed or provide a clear benefit to the Tampa Bay watershed. But what is a watershed? It's actually an area of land where the water sheds into a specific water body. So in the case of Tampa Bay, the rainfall that occurs anywhere in this boundary that you see in that red outline, it eventually drains into Tampa Bay through creeks and streams and lakes, man-made storm drains, rivers, and the watershed is nearly 6 times the size of the estuary itself. So those eligible groups that we just went over, they don't necessarily have to be inside the watershed boundaries. For instance, a nonprofit whose office is in Dunedin or a business like on the east side of Lakeland, they wouldn't be within the watershed boundaries, but if their projects were occurring in the watershed or directly benefiting the watershed, then that nonprofit or business or whoever could still be eligible. You just need to make that super crystal clear in the application. So many projects have been in Tampa Bay proper, in Tampa Bay itself. I would personally love to see a lot more projects on the outer regions of the watershed. So think Zephyr Hills, Plant City, Lithia, Bradley Junction, all those good places. If you are in those areas, I'd definitely like to talk more about possibilities for that. and you can explore this boundary on the Tampa Bay Estuary Program website. So let's go back. Purpose of the grant: environmental restoration or education. But let's be a little bit more specific about that. This is the Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan for Tampa Bay, a big long title that we just shortened to CCMP. The document contains a ton of information about what specific actions should be undertaken in order to restore and protect the Tampa Bay Estuary. There are 9 sections from the CCMP listed on your application. So let's say you want to do a project where you educate boaters about the importance of motoring slowly on the Hillsborough River to prevent shoreline erosion, to prevent damage to underwater plants, to prevent injuring manatees. You might choose the bay habitat section of the CCMP, preserve healthy bay habitat. That's what you want to include in your application as the CCMP, the goal that your project will address. Or you could choose the public education and involvement section. Both of these are solid choices for that kind of project. You might even include both of them. Including both might make your application stronger. What you don't want to include is anything and everything that might be relevant. Limit your CCMP goals between 1, at most 3, but 2 is a good one. Whatever you choose, just make sure you clearly spell out which CCMP goals your project are going to address. So both in your scope of work that we'll talk about and in the question that specifically asks this in the application. Each year, we set funding priorities. You'll see with the new evaluation criteria that points can be gained for addressing a funding priority. Priorities are sometimes selected to address an emerging issue or further along high priority issues. And this year, we're doing something a little bit different by targeting specific audiences as the funding priority. These audiences are businesses, public school groundskeeping staff, underserved and overburdened communities, Indigenous communities, and veterans. Definitions for underserved and overburdened communities are in our equity strategy and the TBEP equity strategy that is linked in your application materials, just so you know. So while these are funding priorities this year, remember that anything in the CCMP is eligible. So don't feel like you have to smush your project to fit with one of these audiences. You just do you would do what works for you, but there is an incentive if you do choose to work with them. This program has been going on since the 90s, y'all, so there's a lot of past examples to look at. These are a few of them. You're welcome to look at past projects to get some inspiration or see what's been funded in the past. There's a link on the website where you can click to view the past projects. I think it just has a project name and the awardee listed for some of the older years, but the more recent years have like a short project description and some other information too. Your tip here is projects that combine restoration and education are more likely to be funded. So don't take these examples as gospel. We would love to see your new, unique idea as well. So don't be afraid to think outside of the box. We've talked about who can apply, what will get funded. Now let's talk about how to apply. It might seem a little bit out of order because we haven't talked about the criteria yet, but I think this was going to be helpful. So the first tip here, review all the information before you get started. We aren't going over every detail today because that would take forever, but you should do that before applying. And these are the steps that I recommend taking. Number 1, review the info packet or application materials, however you want to call it. They are linked on the website. All the materials are on a TBEP Google Drive, so you can open it, make a copy, and then you can make it your own, make your own document. There are several simple questions in the application document itself. You should make your own copy of the document, answer all of the questions in your own version. That way you can just copy and paste them into the online application when the time comes to submit. On the right-hand side is a screenshot of what the actual application portal looks like. Number 3, draft your scope of work, and we'll go over that in more detail. Number 4, draft a very detailed budget. Reach out to partners for letters of support. gather any other documents you might need, such as a map of the project area, quotes for large equipment purchases, that kind of thing. These are all materials you might want to include. And then go back over everything and finalize it. Lastly, submit your application via the online portal by September 13th at 5 p.m. Seems pretty straightforward. We're going to talk more about all of this. But first, you should know that when you have a draft scope of work and budget ready, that you should send it to me. Like, really, send me your application in advance and I'll review it. I'll give you candid feedback, make suggestions for making it that much stronger. The closer we get to the application deadline, the less quality feedback you're going to be able to get from me, though. And I'll be blunt and say that anything that is sent to me after roughly August 28th is not going to get a very super thorough review. So get those drafts to me as soon as possible. When you are ready to submit your application, like I said, you're going to copy and paste the application answers directly into the online portal. Then you're going to attach your scope of work, your budget, and your supporting documents. Just like sending an email, you cannot make changes after you've sent it. Make sure that everything is exactly the way you want it before you submit it. And last tip here, there's a 30 megabyte limit on what can be submitted through the online portal. So just make sure that you're within that limit to avoid any issues when you're submitting your application. Do not wait until the last minute to submit your application. Late applications are not accepted. If you have questions about this or you're worried about the technology aspect, just reach out to me far in advance of the September 13th deadline. So let's talk about arguably the most important part of your application. The scope of work is how you're communicating to the reviewers what your project is all about. It should be thoroughly detailed, but not overly verbose. We receive 30 or 40 applications each year, so it's important to keep your scope of work to the 4-page limit for the sake of the volunteer reviewer sanity, if nothing else. So I'm going to open a scope of work template. Did not sign out. Thank you very much. Whatever, that's okay. So let's just check it out and go through it. Let me see if I can. Obviously, it would sign me out right now, right? We're doing it, despite technology not being our friend today. Okay. So if I read everything in this template, this webinar would be 5 hours. So I'm not going to do that. But I will go over the items that we get the most questions about. So there is a lengthy set of examples here for goals versus success metrics versus deliverables. It starts in this table right here with some explanations of what all these things are. These examples are not exhaustive. You can build your own. So you can pull from this if that's helpful, but this is just to give you a sense of what makes sense for this sort of thing. So your goal is basically a version of the CCNP subject that you plan to address. For example, for this one, restore native habitat by installing oysters. The CCNP goal is bay habitats. It's right there in the parentheses. So that's the goal. Put oyster habitat into the bay. But how will you measure whether or not you succeed with that goal? The success metric used in this example is install a minimum of 30 oyster bags. Great, that is a specific number, specific action, it's straightforward. But now how are you going to prove that you met your goal, that you met your success metric? We need that proof. So that is where the deliverable in the far right column comes in. In this case, a map of where oyster bags are installed and photos of the installed oyster bags. That is totally sufficient. I think that works for this. Let's go to another example. This one, educate youth on atmospheric deposition. The CCNP goal is listed here as water quality. The success metric, have 50 people under 25 years old attend an educational event. The metric addresses what the education piece will look like. It describes who they're counting as youth. It gives a specific number of attendees that we can say, yes, 70 people attended their event, so they met their goal, or only 45 people attended, so they'll need to do a little additional work to reach that goal of 50 attendees. Then how do they prove that? How do they prove how many people came? How do they prove they met that metric? That you could do photos of the event, sign-in sheets for the attendees that includes the attendees' ages. And in this example, they've also included a digital copy of a video that they made for the event. So you're going to create your own goals, your own metric, your own deliverables, whatever makes sense for your project is what you'll put in your scope of work. You can use a table format like we've done here. You can use a bullet points, whatever format works best for you. Just make sure it's really clear and that it's really easy to follow. So these are all examples. There's 2 whole pages of those examples. But the next part is the timeline. So mini grants are conducted over the course of 1 year. So January 1 to December 31, 2025 is the application period open now. Broken up into 4 quarters, this is what it might look like. 4 quarters, 3 months each. This is how you can sort of lay it out. It's totally okay to estimate if you're not sure if something's going to happen in late March or early April. That's okay. Don't sweat that level of stuff. It's fine to estimate. The timeline should show roughly how much you expect to spend in each quarter, so include an estimate here. This section is really just meant to help you frame your project over the course of the 1-year grant. It also helps reviewers see that you've thought through it, how you're going to carry out the work, what exactly your timeline will look like as the project manager. So lastly, we've got the project narrative here at the end. This is really where you want to share a story. With the above sections, you've outlined the project. With the narrative, you can provide more detail, including background information, why you think this project is needed, why it's helpful, what your inspiration was, or maybe background information on the activities or the metrics that you've laid out. Really tell the story of the project in a way that will hook the reviewer's attention. This entire scope of work should not exceed 4 pages. And just so you know, in addition to this template, there is an example scope of work for a project that I made up. So feel free to check that out as you're putting yours together as well. For now, back to our presentation. So the people reviewing, as I mentioned, your application are volunteers. It's good to keep it short and sweet. Include necessary detail to get your idea across, to show how you'll execute it, but don't be overly verbose. Keep that in mind. The reviewers will definitely appreciate it. Your budget is also super important. Use the template, provide enough detail, and be concise. Fill out every cell that's applicable to your project. Matching funds are not required for Bay Mini grants, but it does make your application stronger. Matching funds can come from volunteer time even, which is valued at $31.80 per hour. It could also be donations or staff salary or a different grant or donations or donated services. You've got a lot of options for matching. So what is enough detail but concise? Let's look at some examples. So for plants, you should include the name of the plant, the size of the pot or the plug or whatever, the cost per plant, and the number of those plants that you plan to purchase. This example, Dune sunflower, 1 gallon pot, $6.99 per pot, 20 of them. The total cost for Dune sunflowers would be about $140. Remember that only native Florida plants can be used for Bay Mini grant projects. This is kind of one of the weird parts. I'm going to show you 2 different ways of describing the exact same thing in your budget. So let's say you want 10 signs for your rain garden. You know how much the materials, the labor, and the design will cost. You can choose to lay it out, design in 1 row, materials in 1 row, labor in another. This is great. You're providing adequate detail. You're showing reviewers what the funds will be used for. This is perfect. Another way of doing the same thing is in this second screenshot. Design, materials, and labor are collapsed into 1 row, but the adequate detail is still there. reviewers can see that each sign will cost about $90 to create and install. You should choose which of these approaches works best for your budget item. I can't tell you which one. I mean, I can help you if I'm reviewing your application, but sometimes it's better to spell things out row by row. Sometimes it's better to lump them together. This is completely up to you as the grant writer, the project manager. The key is just making sure that you're providing adequate detail. If any one item on your budget exceeds $500, you should include at least 2 quotes for those items to provide the reviewers with a cost comparison. You don't have to choose the lowest cost, but you just want to justify why. For example, you're renting a piece of equipment for $1,000 instead of $700. If you do get quotes that for more expensive items, include those in your application too. There are budget restrictions to keep in mind, and you should definitely read the information document thoroughly regarding the budget. The most common items you'll include in your budget are salary, mileage, and food, and at least the things that have limits that you'll include on there. So mileage cannot exceed 10% of the budget. It has to be reimbursed at this rate, this 44.5 cents per mile. If your total funding request is $5,000, that means only $500 for mileage. $2,500 budget request, only $250 can be for mileage, and so forth. Food costs cannot exceed 25% of the total budget, and there are specific amounts that can be reimbursed for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, so make sure you follow those rules. Lunch, for instance, is $11 per person. And one big change this year is salary in the budget. We are not placing a firm limit on what you can request for salary in your Bay Mini Grant budget. The limit used to be 10%, but we were getting feedback that made things kind of taxing, especially on like the smaller organizations and the smaller nonprofits. So this year there is no salary limit. However, just because requesting $5,000 for salary is allowed, that does not mean that you should do it. I'm going to recommend that you keep your salary request under 25% of the budget. I think that anything above that is just not going to be competitive in the eyes of the reviewers. So do with that what you will. If you are including salary for staff members, describe how and why they are involved. Put that probably in the scope of work. You should include whether or not that staff person and their supervisor have agreed to allow that person to work on this project. You can include that in the scope of work too. You definitely don't want to be like assigning work to people who haven't actually agreed to help. So this is a blank budget. This is a real blank budget. Yeah, so this is the template. Use this. You can make a copy of the document, make your own. When you submit it, you can attach it as an Excel spreadsheet or a PDF, whatever works for you. And we'll go over a couple examples here. So this is a pretty good budget. We've got the name here. We've got item descriptions for each thing. We've got rates where they're appropriate. We've got quantities for everything. You're telling me how much each of these budget items cost, and then you're breaking it down between the Bay Mini Grant funding request and matching funds. And then if they are being paid by matching funds, describing what that match is and where that's coming from. It doesn't exceed $5,000. So this is a pretty good budget. I like this one. This is a not so good budget, starting with, there's no project name here. You're submitting a few documents, so just make sure your project name is on everything that you submit to prevent issues down the road. Oysters, that doesn't tell us much. So provide enough detail. Safety, that doesn't tell us much. T-shirts, we generally are not funding giveaway items like t-shirts or whatnot with Bay Mini Grants. The rate here is blank. 40 oysters, does that mean like literally 40 oysters or 40 oyster bags or 40 tons of oysters? Who knows? Volunteer lunch, you got to provide the rate since we know that lunch is limited at $11 an hour. 100 miles for this kind of project, that's kind of a lot. It's still within the budget, I believe, or within the limitations, but you're going to want to explain like why you're expecting to spend so much money on mileage. Salary exceeds 25%. Food cost exceeds 25%. This seems like a project that should have an estuary program sign, but it's not included here. The total is not adding up correctly. The funding request is over $5,000. The matching funds here, they don't provide a source for that. So a lot of issues here. You want to make sure that your math is mathin' when you are putting together your budget. Make sure everything adds up appropriately. So definitely follow the better example when you're doing yours. Yeah, triple check your math. No one has a crystal ball, and if you do, let me know. But do your best to estimate how much things are going to cost in January 2025, because that's when this work starts. It's okay to pad the numbers a little bit, but make it clear what you're doing and why you're doing that. There are some expenses that are just flat out not allowed. Make sure that you aren't including those in your project. Clothing, lobbying, non-native plant species or animal species are not allowed. Do not buy materials before you've received the official notice to proceed. You won't get reimbursed for items for services that weren't included in your budget. If changes are needed, we can amend the scope of work and budget in most cases, but that does require working together and not just like assuming it's fine and moving on. We've gone over eligibility, how to apply. Now let's look at how to get how your application will be evaluated. All applications that meet the requirements that we've already gone over will be sent to volunteers from the Community Advisory Committee for review. So we've already gone over all of these requirements. Reviewers use these criteria to review your application. Some of the criteria are new this year. So even if you've applied for a Bay Mini grant before, just pay attention to updates. Excuse me. Notice how many points are assigned for each of these criteria. 15 points for clearly demonstrating how your project will improve Tampa Bay. The scope of work should explicitly state how your project will address restoration, enhancement, or protection of the bay, or how it will address the community, or ideally both, like we've talked about. When assessing the strength of the application, the reviewers are looking for a clear connection to one of the CCMP priorities. They're also looking to see if the project time period and outcomes are realistic. Can these deliverables actually be achieved in 1 year or not? They are looking for clearly stated project goals for straightforward, measurable success metrics. The budget should be adequately detailed and all items relate directly to the project. The project goals should enhance science literacy, can enhance science literacy in these priority audiences that we already went over. There are points assigned for addressing those audiences. You can also include how you'll promote the mini grant program or the Tarpon tag. That will get you points as well. Are you engaging the public in this project? Are you building stewardship in your target community? Make sure that that is spelled out. Notice how many points are assigned for community engagement. It's a lot. When applicable and possible, describe how you'll not only implement this project, but also how any maintenance or monitoring will occur past the 1 year grant timeline. For instance, if you're installing a garden, what happens to the garden in year 2? Who's going to take care of it? Are you planning to monitor the success of the rain garden? How will you do that? And who will do that? Tell us why you think you'll succeed. You can talk about past projects or other grants that you've been awarded. If you haven't done anything like this before, talk about your history in recruiting volunteers or overseeing a team to carry out a common goal. There are some questions specific to this in the application document, and you can include details in your scope of work too. Funding projects in areas that are underserved or overburdened, or projects that are led by communities that are underserved or overburdened is very important to us at TPIP. So the CAC decided to include points specifically for this year in the Bay Mini grants. Describe the role of all project partners. Don't throw like a random partner in there without telling us why they're involved. If we see just some name in there, but it never tells us what they're doing, we're just not sure why it's in there. Again, matching funds are not required, but having matching funds does strengthen your application. Lastly, let's work together to ensure that all boats rise with the tide. If you have received a Bay Mini grant before, not answering that phone call. If you've received a Bay Mini grant before, how will you use your experience and success to build others up? This isn't a requirement, but it does strengthen your application. And if you're a newbie, you aren't at a disadvantage to past awardees. We are giving new applicants a freebie of 5 points. Now you know how to develop a strong proposal. You know how to apply. Remember that applications are due by September 13th at 5 p.m. Then the volunteer review team will take about a month or so to review everything. A funding recommendation will be approved by our board, excuse me, in November. And I'll notify applicants as soon after that November board meeting as I can. Then in December, project managers, you and I will work together to iron out the paperwork, and projects will begin on or just before January 1, 2025. All funded projects require 3 quarterly reports and 1 final report. The deadlines are here. They should also be in your project timeline in the scope of work. A reporting template is provided, so you don't have to make this up yourself. To receive reimbursement, you must document your purchases. So you'll submit an invoice with receipts to get reimbursed. I'll also give you a blank invoice template that you can use if you want to. We request that you only invoice once per quarter. If that isn't feasible for some reason, if you need to be reimbursed more often than that, just talk to me and we can definitely work through that together. And this is it. Right before we go on to questions, you can start adding questions to chat now if you have them. We really want to help you succeed. It is our job to support you. So please do reach out if you have questions, concerns, ideas. We're really happy to talk things through with you. Don't forget, I put August 19th on there. Maybe I was feeling a little spicy when I made it. By August 28th for sure, but August 19th even better. You can schedule a phone call with me, send me your draft, and we will go over it together. So that is it. We are going to move on to questions. One last thing I want to mention is we understand that many of y'all applying for this grant are volunteers. If you will, or you're doing it on volunteer time anyway, so just reach out to us. We want to help you. If regular business hour stuff doesn't work for you, that's okay. Just let me know. So feel free to turn your cameras on. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute and let me know if you have questions. I'll start with one for y'all. Has anyone applied for a Bay Mini grant before? Nope. All newbies. Well, you get free 5 points. 5 free points just for applying this year. So, any questions, y'all?
I put one in the chat. I was just wondering where on the site, or like, is it, if it's in the template, the rates for food are, just so that I don't miss that.
I will show you. So in the budget template, there is this tab. Oh, I'm not sure. Sorry. In the budget template, there is on the bottom a tab with instructions.
Oh, okay, awesome. I see it now. I did not notice that. Thank you.
That's okay, but it is all in the information as well, under budget guidelines. Yeah, it's all right here.
Okay, in 2 spots. I can't miss it. It didn't look very hard.
Hopefully.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Do y'all have an idea of what you're going to apply for, or Do you know if you're definitely applying this year or you're gonna wait?
We're definitely applying. We've been going back and forth with like 3 different ideas. And thank you again for making time to meet with me.
Yeah.
I told the team that we had to get something into you by the 13th because I
Good.
know how we work. And
Yeah.
I'll probably reach out to you next week to just, if it's okay, put something on the calendar. And then that gives us, you know, a hard cutoff to get some very necessary constructive feedback on our submission. But yeah, we should have some, we should have pinpointed exactly what we're considering by then.
Okay. Cool. I like it when Sarah is like herding all the cats. Being like, you're gonna get this in on time.
Yeah,
Whether
I think I don't know why I thought the 13th. Maybe I was feeling extra spicy.
maybe, yeah, right. Maybe you saw September 13th and read
Right,
August. I don't know. Yeah.
right.
Well, I know I wasn't that thorough. Somebody's got to have questions.
I know, just you're pretty thorough there, you know. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's almost like you gave this webinar before.
What's that?
It's almost like you gave this webinar before. I said, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for the tips and some of the guidance because I've never heard some of that before. It makes absolute sense. But not necessarily something I knew walking into this. So thank you.
For sure.
Hey Jessica, it's
Oh,
it's
yeah.
Elizabeth. I guess is this roughly the same schedule like each year?
Roughly. Yeah.
Okay,
This one
cool.
is a little different than we've done before. And we might change it again a little bit next year, but
Okay.
kind of roughly opens early summer, closes early fall.
Okay, cool. You know, I have like other things, so I'm trying to figure out what I'm focusing on.
Yeah.
So,
Great.
but this was very helpful. So thank you.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm not gonna hold you unless you have any more questions. Okay. Well, I appreciate y'all. Thanks for coming. Nice to see your faces. Send drafts to me. I'll be looking for them. And thank you for coming to the webinar.
Thank
Have a good one.
you.
Thank you.